Well, welcome everybody. We are going to get started here. My name is Matt Reichert. I direct the Center for Learning at OCP. Awfully glad to have you with us here today for this conversation discussing effective ways to prepare liturgies. As you can imagine, given a topic like that, there is an awful lot that we could discuss. So today I'm describing this conversation a little bit like a switchboard conversation, meaning we're going to talk about a variety of things, and hopefully we'll suggest some strategies or ideas that could be useful to you in your ministry. I'm also hoping, if nothing else, we can point you to where you can find additional resources, whether that's something we offer or any of the organizations our panelists represent, the other organizations that we belong to. We want you at the end of this to at least know where to go if you don't have some ideas to be able to implement. So before we move on and we really officially kick things off with prayer, I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. And Jeremy, I'm going to ask you to go first because I see you first on my screen if you want to say hello to the folks.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm Jeremy Helms. I serve as the Director of Worship and Sacraments for the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, formerly the Chair of the Board of Directors for NPM, and a longtime Parish Director of Music and Worship before I came here to this soulless bureaucracy that is the Diocesan Chancery.
We'll clip the recording right after. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for being here. And Jeremy joined us for a conversation last year, not quite a year ago, specifically looking at liturgical assessment, which is going to be a topic, foreshadowing here, that we're going to certainly discuss today. So that conversation, that webinar recording and resource packet, you can find on our website, and I'll show you where you can locate that video if you're interested before our time here ends. So thanks for being back, Jeremy. And first time, hopefully not last time, panelist Adrian, do you want to say hello to the folks?
Hello, everyone. I'm Adrian Soltis. I'm the Director of Worship at a parish in New Jersey in the Archdiocese of Newark, about 4,000 families. I'm also on the NPM Planning Forum. So that's kind of my life for now.
For now, until the other 10 things we'll ask you to do come your way. So thanks for being here. And again, everybody who's joining us live, everyone who's watching this recording, thanks for spending some time with us on this topic, taking time out of what I'm sure is a busy day in your office to join us. So I'm going to share my screen, and through the magic of Zoom, hopefully you will be able to see both me and the screen here. And I'm going to move way back to the beginning. I want to pose this reflection question to you, and you, dear participants, can choose to participate however you would like. I'd like to invite you to think about this question, certainly, and if you'd like to, you can go ahead and put your response in the chat. So this is where I want us to start. I want you to think about maybe an obvious question to kick off a conversation like this. How would you like to improve your current experience in preparing liturgies? Whether this is something you yourself do, you're involved in preparing liturgies, or maybe you oversee someone or participate in a group that's responsible for preparing liturgies. How would you like to see that experience improve? So take a second, sort of visualize really what we're going after, so that then hopefully our conversation today can focus on those particular areas. As we go through this conversation, those of you joining us live, you have the chat feature. Know that when you add something into the chat feature, everyone who has access to the chat can see your comment. So you're welcome to add things into the chat. You also have a Q&A feature where you can add a question that I'll be able to see and pitch to our panelists at some point throughout the conversation. So as you're thinking about your response to this question, how you'd like to improve your current experience, please feel free to add something to the chat, add an idea or a suggestion to the chat, or add an idea, suggestion, question into that Q&A feature. Okay. So as you're thinking about this question, let's pray. Let's start our time in prayer, and as we do so, let's keep in mind all of those intentions that our virtual community is bringing here today. Let's keep in mind our parish and school communities that we represent, our diocesan communities represented in this virtual community. Let's certainly pray for peace, for safety, especially in war-torn areas, in weather-torn areas, thinking in particular about the Gulf Coast, for all those who are sick, for all those who will die this day. And let's pray with the Collect for Ministers of the Church from the Roman Missal. And you can join me in your office or listen along as we pray. O God, who have taught the ministers of your church to seek not to be served, but to serve their brothers and sisters, grant, we pray, that they may be effective in action, gentle in ministry, and constant in prayer. Through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, God, forever and ever. Amen. Okay, so we started with this question: how you would like to improve your current experience of preparing liturgies. What I'd like to do to frame our conversation, and panelists to frame the conversation for you, is actually suggest a different question that I think we should ask first in order to best answer this question. And that question is this: if our liturgy preparation efforts were effective, and they likely might be in your community, how would we know? If our preparation efforts are effective, what would we see? What would they look like? And what I want to suggest to frame our conversation for today is that there are at least 4 indicators that would indicate effective preparation. And you might word these differently. You might add to the list. You might take exception to some of these, panelists or participants. But let's, at least for the sake of this discussion, start with these 4 areas. Our liturgical preparation would be effective if those preparation efforts are aligned with our rubrics, if they foster the full active conscious participation of the assembly, if they're done in a healthy, balanced, sustainable way. That's our experience, if they're done healthy, balanced, sustainable. And also if those efforts keep everyone aligned, informed, equipped to serve in their ministerial role. Our cantors and accompanists know what they're doing and why. Our presiders and preachers know what's going on. Our extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion know what's going on. Everything's coordinated. So I want to suggest that, again, starting with the end in mind, what would it look like if our preparation were effective? That these would be 4 indicators. Again, maybe you would add something to the list. Maybe you would word it a little bit differently. But let's start with those 4, because what I'd like to do in today's conversation, I'm going to skip this question, is I'd like to focus our discussion around these 4 question areas. So Jeremy and Adrian, I'm going to come to you in just a second to kick us off with these questions. If, again, these are our indicators, sorry, I'm going to go back here for a second: alignment with rubrics, fostering participation, sustainable practice, aligned and informed. Then let's discuss these areas, at least to begin. What are the essential resources that we should be using or utilizing to prepare liturgies? What are the strategies or approaches that best can keep us aligned in terms of pastoral practice to foster full conscious active participation? How can we do this more efficiently? And how can we do this to maintain balance in our preparation efforts? And then also, as you know, outside of that preparation circle, what are some strategies and tips to keep people aligned and informed? Okay, so those are the questions that I'd like us to frame our conversation around, and then we can get into some other areas. So maybe let's start. And Adrian, I'm going to come to you first, if that's all right. With that first question, as you're thinking, you're preparing liturgies at St. Helens, like, what are the essential resources that you have at hand that you find help those preparation efforts be more effective?
And back to basics, you have your meat and potatoes. You got your Roman Missal and you got your lectionary, obviously. And I always cheat and I go on the USCCB website because it kind of puts everything into a nice calendar for you. Click on the Sunday you're trying to plan or the holy day you're trying to plan for, and there's your lectionary readings for the day. LTP has a pretty good source book too sometimes that I kind of flip through. Liturgy.com, if you're subscribed to that. Those are all kind of good tools to get some ideas, but I would definitely at the forefront, ruminate over the scriptures yourself and see what speaks to you.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. Jeremy, as you as the Office of Divine Worship in Cincinnati, I know you do a lot of formation and programming and resourcing the parishes in Cincinnati. If I'm a maybe new or seasoned music director or liturgy director in your archdiocese and say, what are my essential resources? What would you add, or what would you point me towards?
Well, I think everything Adrian just said is correct. And I would emphasize that looking both at the missal and the lectionary are really, as you said, the meat and potatoes. And you really have to start there because that's fixed for us. We don't have to worry about whether or not that's going to change or what's going on in the world that's going to affect that. At the same time, I can't remember which teacher of preaching said you really ought to prepare with both the Bible and the New York Times or something like that. And I guess my point is, I think we have to be aware of what's going on in our community, what's going on in our nation and the world, as we think about what hymn texts are going to be appropriate, what anthems might make the most sense. And it's not that we want to bob and weave from week to week changing things, but it's more like, can we anticipate something important in our community? So in addition to all of those fixed resources that Adrian really laid out pretty well, how else are we thinking about what's going on in the life of our community? I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Well said. Real quickly, participants, I'm seeing your messages that you're unable to add something to the chat. We're working behind the scenes to try to enable that. But I can tell you that the Q&A feature does work. So if you have a question that you were going to put in the chat or a recommendation, put it in the Q&A feature, and we'll make sure that it comes through to us. So a couple of things that I want to point out, and for those of you who are joining us, what I'm about to show you and what we're discussing might feel remedial, right, for some. For others, you might not know what the heck we're talking about as we reference some of these resources. So we likely have a spread. So what I want to do is I want to point you to where you might find some of these resources that we're referencing. If this is already something you're aware of, keep in mind there are likely people in your community or others with whom you serve who don't know this information, this prior knowledge that you already have. So keep this in mind, maybe not as a source of information for you, but as a way you might resource others in your community to find the materials that we're referencing. So first, I am going to, once again, share my screen. And I want to jump back to something that you mentioned, Adrian, a resource that you mentioned, and that is the USCCB website, because this is a website that I have bookmarked that I go to for a lot for liturgy planning. And when I'm at conferences or at parishes talking about liturgy planning, I'm always struck by the number of people who might not know what type of resources are available on the USCCB website that can really assist music and liturgy directors. So first and foremost, if in this hybrid environment, if you're in your office, sometimes working at home, and you don't always have your lectionary at hand, one of the most helpful tools in the USCCB website is the daily readings tool. So if you take a look based upon the national calendar, so there might be some liturgical days in your local diocese that might look a little bit different. For example, in my home diocese, Saturday, the 7th of September was not the Saturday of the 22nd Sunday or 22nd week in ordinary time. It was the solemnity of St. Cloud, because that's our patron. So know that this is a national calendar, not necessarily your diocesan or archdiocesan calendar. But as you look, you can take a look and see the 24th Sunday in ordinary time. Here are the lectionary readings. The full text with citation, also the lection number, if you need it for reference. It includes the responsorial psalm, the second reading. What I find super helpful is also the text for the gospel acclamation. There are plenty of times when I'm cantering or playing and realize, oh shoot, I forgot to look at what what the text is for the gospel acclamation, and I'm pulling up this page on my phone to have it on the organ bench next to me. And then certainly the gospel. It does not include the entrance or communion antiphon text, but it does include our primary readings from Scripture. So first and foremost, this is really helpful. In addition, just seeing this calendar layout is also helpful in knowing what are we celebrating on what days? Some of the basics like liturgical color, you can see a lot of these things here. There's also, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but right under the heading daily readings, you can also toggle to see these readings in Spanish, which is really useful. So I want to point that out. Second thing I want to point out is under the prayer and worship tab for the USCCB website, under the liturgical year and calendar, there's a variety of texts here that are informative that you might think about sharing with your choir or your liturgical ministers as you're helping develop them, or if you write a weekly, or excuse me, a monthly bulletin article, this might give you some content for that. There's also references to the liturgical calendar with holy days of obligation and days of prayer special observance, which are useful. Here are some things where there are recent additions or changes to the calendar, which are also helpful to know about. But what I find super helpful is this button here below, liturgical calendar for the Diocese of the United States. So if you click on this button, and you'll see our current 2024 calendar, the 2025 calendar, and the 2026 calendar. This is a PDF you can download that includes, so I'm looking now at the calendar starting with Advent this year. This document includes introductory material. I know I'm going through quickly here. It includes important celebration dates for the coming year. As we know, Ash Wednesday and Easter move around. So therefore, when are our other principal feasts associated, which is super useful? What are the lectionary cycles? And then as you scroll through, I know I'm moving through this quickly, a general overview calendar, but for each day of the liturgical year, it gives you the description of the feast or the observance. It gives you the liturgical color. It gives you the scripture passages. It gives you any other options that might be listed. It gives you lection numbers. It gives you a bunch of information. So I highly recommend downloading this resource, keeping it at hand, referencing it, sharing it, putting it in your sacristy. It's a free thing, and it's super useful. Adrian or Jeremy, is that a document that you utilize, or perhaps maybe in your archdioceses you have your own particular ordo that you publish?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd certainly recommend people have that, but whether you buy this from the Paulus or you get it from somewhere else, having what's called the Ordo is an incredibly helpful document because it will provide all of that and more all in one place and day by day and lots of things. So whether you buy it from the Paulus or someone else, the actual Ordo is quite helpful too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, keep in mind that your the source that I showed you on the USCCB website is easy to get. It's free. You can download it now. There are others. Like Jeremy held up the Ordo. Your diocese might have its own particular Ordo that's published that would reflect local celebrations, dedication of your cathedral, your local patron, things like that. So this is a great time for you to check with your diocesan office of worship to see if there's something particular that's published or that they recommend. We also referenced before, and again, I know this might be remedial, but this is something that I think is helpful for you to be aware of, to point out to others in your community. I'm going to share my screen really quickly to show you this PDF of the Roman Missal. You likely, hopefully, have access to the actual book or a study edition, but I want to point out it's always interesting to me to see the number of people who are responsible for preparing liturgies who don't ever really consult the missal itself. You might consult the lectionary, certainly, and liturgical calendar. But just so you know what is included in the missal, in addition to the collects and things for each day, the texts for the entrance and the communion antiphons for each day, the Roman Missal also includes a lot of information at the beginning that can be useful, like the universal norms on the liturgical year and the general Roman calendar can be super helpful, especially when we're looking at understanding liturgical days and the preference for, or the precedence for liturgical days, especially when we're looking at something, I want to prepare for Paschal Triduum. How do I think about that? Here are 4 paragraphs that give you some direction, practically, technically speaking, for Paschal Triduum, but also an overview of that particular season that might be useful in your preparation. In addition, there's the general Roman calendar that's present, but then also for each Sunday and each weekday, the collect texts that can be also instructive. Again, the entrance antiphon texts. This is also really useful for some of those tricky things that maybe you're not so sure about or confident about. Sundays in Advent, do we sing the Gloria or not? We'll have some information again in the Roman Missal in case you're starting to question what you need to know about. A lot of that is in the Roman Missal. So if
Can
you've
you
not
keep that
cracked it
screen up
open,
for a
look,
second?
go
Can you
ahead.
keep that screen up for a second,
Oh,
Matt? I
yeah.
wanted to point out something that I used to do quite a bit. I worked with a pastor who really was interested in what the opening hymn or psalm and antiphon were going to be for Mass, because he would often incorporate that into whatever his introductory comments would be following the sign of the cross.
Sure.
And I said, I'll meet you one further. I said, I'll start looking at the collect prayers. And if I'm between 2 particular hymns or songs, I might try to choose a hymn or song that is then reflected in the collect prayer that concludes the introductory rite. So, for example, the image you're in here about running to meet Christ, or righteous deeds, gathering at his right hand, something about the kingdom. If you're, trying to look for what would be an appropriate gathering hymn, perhaps look at the themes and the phraseology here and choose a hymn that resolves with the collect. That's one way to use the Roman Missal.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great suggestion, Jeremy. And also, presages a little bit the concept that, as we're doing this planning, we want our planning to be in line with rubrics, with our ritual books. So knowing what scripture passages we're going to hear proclaimed and knowing the collects and the calendar, of course, are going to be helpful to us, right? But we also want to make sure that we are fostering full conscious active participation. And one of the ways that we can do that is by planning the whole, right? So in the example you gave, Jeremy, of looking at hymn texts that reflect the images and the symbols and the concepts, the terms of phrase that are present in the collects that we'll be hearing, help with that general experience and liturgical catechesis that leads to the full conscious active participation as well. So not just to think about it as an idea bank, but also how we're creating a sense of unity in our celebrations with what you're suggesting, I think is a really useful point. And then I do want to point out, because this is something that I want to make sure everyone's understanding, that there are lots of resources you can point to that will help you understand where things are going. But in the Missal, there's also a lot of instruction when it comes to things like Triduum. Palm Sunday, what are the options? What are we supposed to do? Lots of information right in the Missal. If you're not accustomed to referencing the Missal to know what you need to prepare or order of events, for example, here, Palm Sunday of the Lord's Passion, seeing the 3 options that are available, this is a great place to go. So know that there's a lot in the red that you might utilize in your own planning efforts as well. Okay. So let's talk about full conscious active participation. There's a couple of other resources that I want to point people to, but let's get to that second topic. Adrian, as you started us off by talking about the basics, right? And how we make sure we're aligned to those rubrics and essential resources. As you're preparing, like, what do you do, or what are the strategies you utilize to keep those pastoral considerations of participation in mind as you're selecting hymn texts, as you're really preparing the way the assembly will experience the liturgical celebration? How do you keep participation in mind?
Well, Jeremy mentioned something that's often overlooked, but the kind of relationship you have with the presider, the musician or the director of worship, it really should be a symbiotic relationship, and approach the planning of the liturgy taking into account what the presider might preach about. What are some of the topics he wants to bring to the forefront of the community? And as we know, one of the judgments in Sing to the Lord when you're picking music is pastoral. So you have to know the context of your own community. So for a personal example of our church, we have a group that meets in the summer to plan out the sermon themes for the year. And the pastor obviously is our only presider. We only have one priest, but he sits in on all of them, and he takes everybody's perspective into account as he's putting together his weekly homily notes. I get a copy of that. I'm invited in the planning, and through that, the presider and I really try to paint a picture of how we want our community to worship for the rest of the year. So using that pastoral consideration, it might be current events, it might be some of the problems that plague our specific community, some of the challenges, some of the obstacles, some of the strengths. And then through that whole collaboration, we try to have our short-term planning paint the picture for our long-term planning. In a
Yeah.
nutshell.
Yeah, no, that I think that's great. And one of the things that that as you're talking about this, and participants, as you're hearing Adrian's experience, it might sound like yours. It might sound nothing like the way that homilies or other things are prepared within your community. But one of the things I appreciate about the way that you do this at St. Helens is that you, going back to what you were mentioning, Jeremy, about having the lectionary and the New York Times, same hand, is having multiple people around the table to give some input, whether it's seasonal or it's quarterly or it's once a year or whatever it might be, means that you don't have to do it yourself and you don't have to know everything and represent everything. And it sounds a lot like maybe that's the experience some people might have in terms of their parish liturgy committee serves that function to keep an eye on people's lived experience and making sure that it translates to their own experience. Jeremy, what about in your work, either in the diocese or when you're in parish ministry? Like what are the pastoral sensibilities you would keep in mind to foster participation, keeping that as one of the considerations in your planning?
Yeah, I think it's funny when you were talking about the 4 goals or the 4 outcomes you would like to see that effective preparation can build. You use some adjectives that they would be equipped, that they would be informed. I was thinking about the word disposed. A lot of times the liturgical documents talk about people being properly disposed. And I think that's more than just like not being in a state of grave sin or something like that. I think it's more about like, am I ready to actually participate in this liturgy? Am I ready to be open to what God is going to do here? And I think that's as important for our ministers as it is for the members of the assembly. And so I think one of the things that effective preparation can do is enhance participation by people feeling very comfortable with what they're being asked to do, people being well rehearsed. We shouldn't be teaching music on Sunday morning 10 minutes before Mass to the choir. What we ought to be doing is just being able to pray together, polish a little bit here and there, maybe run something once. We shouldn't be scrambling. Lectors shouldn't be showing up 20 minutes before Mass and finding out that the readings are different than they were expecting. All that has to be done on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Because if on Sunday morning, the disposition of our ministers is frenzy and chaos and a lack of communication, they're not going to be able to enter into prayer. And if they can't actually do their ministry in a prayerful way, that's going to be reflected in the way that people experience it. So I think getting people properly disposed is what can help build that sense of active participation, which is not hindered by chaos and a lack of preparation.
Yeah, no, that's well said. And I think, what I'm hearing in your response, and what's resonating with me today, and where I'm at in my own parish communities and my own diocese where I serve, is that you're right. Some of this is being comfortable with what we're asking to do in terms of the music that's being sung, right? So not only not introducing a new piece 10 minutes before, but also not introducing a new piece that you're not going to utilize again in the foreseeable future. So building a repertoire carefully, pastorally, and that can mean a variety of things, right? We have a webinar you can check out in our video library on introducing new music to your congregation for some strategy. So you could check that out. There are other things that are offered by our friends in the field too. So how to introduce new music and to be thoughtful about it is helpful. That means that you've also planned far enough ahead to give yourself the runway to utilize those pastoral strategies. Some of it also is in, I would imagine, in response to style. Like, I mean, I found it super effective to utilize very powerful hymn texts to connect to all the things we were talking about before, matched with familiar hymn tunes so that the lift of that new piece isn't quite so high, because we can sing a lot of things to Nettleton and feel comfortable with it, right? So
This has been one of the
there's a
great developments, I think, of liturgical music publishing in the last 10, 15 years, is the yoking of fresh new text to solid known tunes. It's fantastic.
100%. And there are a lot of resources that are out there that I'm thinking of. In some of these, I'm familiar with some of our publishing colleagues. There are hymn texts that incorporate in a hymn version the entrance antiphons for the day. So if you want to bring in entrance antiphons but aren't sure how to do it, you could do it in a hymn text way. There are all kinds of hymns for the gospel project where, you know, each gospel reading in our 3-year lectionary cycle for Sundays has a hymn text that's matched that you can use at various points. So lots of resources that exist. I'm seeing a couple of questions come through. Also thinking about how do you utilize chant? Whether that be chanted antiphons or it's simple chant tones for psalms. So you can sing the appointed psalm for the celebration, but maybe your community isn't at a point to sing a new metered psalm, but you could certainly do psalm tones. Or maybe it's a sung response that you do to a simple chant, or you want to change up the mass setting using some of the missal chants that are accessible to people, accompanied or unaccompanied. Again, thinking about, I think you're right, Jeremy, the requirement of what are we asking people to do? Can we articulate that so we can match it with an appropriate response? In addition to the catechetical side of things, right? I mean, you described the fact that not only do they need to be able to do the action, but do they understand the why? Like, why are we doing this? What is it about Advent that causes us to sing in this way or to begin in this way? Presents another opportunity. Adrian, how do you have a, in addition to the group you talked about who resources your pastor and homilists and things like that, do you have a group that helps you select hymns, or does that group, maybe I missed it, does that group also help you with music selection? How does that function in your community?
We have I call it a worship commission, but we do meet once a month and somewhat talk about music texts, but for the most part, that is left in my hands.
Okay.
I've seen it done numerous ways,
Yeah.
collaboratively or more dictatorially, like I would do it. It's more of a personality thing for me, you know.
But you know what? I mean, you joke about that, but I don't think that's dictatorial at all. I think, quite honestly, part of our role as the pastoral music leader in a community is to make those appropriate choices based on our own catechesis, our own formation, our own knowledge of the text. I mean, I think if you were just to like open it up, you'd get, well, I like this, I like this, I know this, I know this. We bring the skill and the art that not every person in the pew has. So I don't think we have to apologize for it at all.
I think in that same vein too, you know, it's our job as directors of music, directors of worship, to move our congregation beyond being consumers that are displeased or displeased by the musical selections we choose, but that actually pray and worship with them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, well said, both of you. I think that's right. And I'm glad you mentioned it in advance of the next resource that I want to refer to, because sometimes when people think about planning or preparation, especially when they think about using, like you mentioned, Adrian, a liturgical commission or a liturgy committee, sometimes people have a verse reaction to the idea of a parish worship commission or liturgy committee because they feel like you're outsourcing the preparation of liturgy to a committee, when at its best, that's not the case. You, as the competent, trained professional, are making the decisions, but you're still consulting with and being able to incorporate input so that you can then go and do. You're responsible for making sure the work happens, for making the ultimate choices, for making the final decision in balance, right? As the designee by your pastor to execute this ministry. but that doesn't mean that you can't do it without consultation, right? So that being said, I'm going to share my screen again. I'm getting really good at finding this button. And I want to show you one web resource and then also some other PDF resources. This is the website for the Federation of Diocesan Liturgical Commissions, or FDLC. If you are not familiar with FDLC, I encourage you to get familiar with the work of FDLC and their website. They have a lot of great resources, great webinars that are free. Here you can see webinars on Eucharistic adoration, especially now that we have the newly updated Holy Communion and Worship of the Eucharistic Mystery Outside of Mass document. Lots of great information here. But when you look, they also have preparation aids. So I'm going to show you this liturgical preparation aid. They're free. These are great PDF resources that include lots of helpful materials. So I'm going to open this one so you can see it. This is for the solemnity of the Most Holy Body and Blood. But what you'll find, whether it's for this solemnity, or if it's for Triduum, or if it's for Advent, you will find a whole host of texts, of outlines, of planning resources, lots of background information that can be helpful to resource whoever might be presiding or preaching, reading options, hymn suggestions, Q&A. Here's an order of procession if you're doing a Eucharistic procession, morning prayer script with exposition and adoration. Lots of resources here. The one for Lent has information about reconciliation and penance services. It also includes information for planning Palm Sunday, Mass of the Lord's Supper, Good Friday, all sorts of things. So check out FDLC. There's lots of resources that are available there. Then the other thing I want to show you real quickly is if you go to the Center for Learning's website, you might be familiar with the Center for Learning website, you might not be. But if you go to our website and in this video tab right at the top, if you click video, you'll see all of our past webinars, or most of our past webinars that are present, that we have posted. And I want to show you, I mentioned before, Jeremy was on our panel before. You can find both the video for our past webinars, but you can also see, where appropriate, the resource packet that's available. So, for example, in liturgical assessment, here's the resource packet that includes documents, guidelines. It also includes roles of a parish worship commission. So as you're thinking about getting a group to help you with some of your preparation, here are some places to begin. We also have a webinar on creating a parish liturgy committee with Rita Thyron and Timothy Johnston. There's also all kinds of information here about how to evaluate liturgy, including a liturgical evaluation survey that covers all aspects of the liturgy to see if we're doing well. And I know I'm scrolling through really quickly. Some resources from the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. So here's a liturgical evaluation tool for Advent and Christmas. That's really helpful. And the reason I show these are there are resources available to you for free to help shape those groups and resource those groups who are helping you make choices. But there are also other resources available, so you can start with the end in mind. And Jeremy, I'm wondering if you could share with us a little bit more about the concept of liturgical assessment, knowing that there are all kinds of resources and stuff out there that people can go to learn more. But maybe could you share a little bit about liturgical assessment and how that practice of liturgical assessment can help us ensure full, conscious, active participation in our assemblies?
Well, sure. And I think the effective assessment actually helps us in the preparation phase too,
Yeah.
because if we can't measure it, or we're not willing to measure it, we're never going to be able to do it better the next time. And so my point is, I think the best use of a worship commission is in the process of assessment and evaluation. Yeah, I love their ideas on the preparation side, but ultimately I got to execute that. But they're the receiver of it. They're the best participant in it. And so I want to get their assessment of what's going on. And, if I'm a parish musician, I love it when people come up to me after Mass and say, "Oh, I love the music today." And I usually say, "Thank you." And then I say, "What did you love about it?"
Hmm.
And I like try to press them, like, was it just pretty, or was there a particular hymn that moved you, or was there the way that it was accompanied, or the use of a particular instrument? Like, what made it special or moving to you? And I think when we can drill into those things, we're much better equipped to then do it better the next time. And so I do think the process of assessment, both on our own, whether we're just kind of taking some notes or making some reflections after a liturgy, or in a monthly or quarterly worship commission or liturgy committee meeting, doing a more formal process of assessment helps us not only to prepare better, but also to ensure that participation. So I think effective assessment leads to better preparation.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's well said. And I want to show one more time, because this is a resource from your office. Looking, for example, at this seasonal preparation or assessment document evaluation tool, includes from the general norms in the liturgical year, which I showed you before at the beginning of the Roman Missal, emphasizes again, the church says Advent has a twofold character. So given that the twofold character is to remember Christ's first coming and to await Christ's second coming, in our preparation, how do we make sure we are reflecting the twofold character instead of just one or the other? So how, at the end of Advent, we should be able to look and see how we were able to do that. But in our preparation, let's look at our text. Let's look at the music that's chosen. Let's look at our preaching. Let's look at our bulletin articles and all of the other catechetical things that we do. Are we keeping a balance of that twofold character or not? It gives us a bit of our marching orders as we're thinking about Advent, so we know what the target is that we're looking to hit. And it's right there in that evaluation tool, which is really instructive. And
And I think this goes
you've
to
got those documents for other seasons too. Do you want to talk
yeah,
about
we've got one for each season, and this is a way to make your worship commission go deeper beyond I liked it or I didn't like it. Like, well, what did it serve the liturgy? I think
that?
is really the key point. And I guess I would say that effective preparation begins maybe at the end of the celebration the year prior. So I'm already thinking, how can I prepare in a kind of remote way next Christmas when I've just finished the last Mass of Christmas Day, or maybe on the 26th? But you know what I'm saying? You want to start thinking, how can we prepare better next year? And that assessment should start right away, not just wait till the January Worship Commission meeting. Make some notes, make some thoughts. And
Yeah, I love that. And you are transitioning as well to our next topic, which is given all this, and there's a lot, right? And there's a lot of things that we can do and a lot of things to consider. And I mean, there are so many times that I stop and think, like, how blessed are we to have been called to a ministry like this with just the richness and the depth of our liturgical celebrations. It's amazing and beautiful, which also means at times it could be overwhelming, right? So thinking about how do we do this preparation and navigate all of these things efficiently. So I like the suggestion, Jeremy, of at the end of this season, make your notes, begin your preparation in advance of next season. That helps with some of the balance and helps. I always think about how can I make future me grateful for today me because of the notes I took or the work that I started to do, right? Adrian, in your work at St. Helens, like what are some of the tips, tricks, or like preparation hacks you have to try to not only do well in your preparation, but to do so efficiently and maintain some sort of balance?
When it comes to planning, I usually just spend June and July and I look through the whole year. When there's a little bit of a lull in that ordinary time after Corpus Christi, that's kind of when I sit back and I sort of map out the rest of the year. That's when it comes to planning. When it comes to like musically, and I don't know if I'm going off script or not, but I always try to kind of always have my next plan for choir and band in the back of my head. So when I plan my first rehearsal in September, I'm not going to spend it banging out parts, but I'm going to spend it trying to enhance the musicality of my musicians so that I can save more time in rehearsal and perhaps do meatier pieces as the years go on. Um, and I found that once I stopped spending so much rehearsal actually teaching music by banging parts out and actually trying to work on the musicality of my musicians, trying to teach them how to sight sing a little better, recognize their intervals. Um, the prep time is cut in half, and it's just very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I would imagine, just like your example of working with your choir, your music ministry, from banging out parts to developing that sense of musicality, that's really a transportable skill, right? An applicable skill you're looking for throughout the year. We also have that opportunity when it comes to the liturgical catechesis and formation for our liturgical ministers and the assembly itself. If we invest our time in understanding, awareness, that type of participation, it's going to pay dividends later. I also would imagine, as many of our listeners are thinking, you're planning ahead, but you're leaving room for that responsiveness. I always find it helpful to look at the liturgical year ahead to see what's happening in our parish, coming up in the world, in the church, that might be useful to be aware of. For example, this next year, we will be observing the year of hope, right? Yes, Jubilee year of hope. So right now, if I'm looking at texts, or if I go to the section of my missal or hymnal, the index, and look at all of the hope themed songs, what are the ones that now what are my musical needs later that I can start to anticipate today in the way I program new hymns, so that by the time I really want us to sing the heck out of that hymn of hope when we're doing our parish's observance of the year of hope, we already know it, right? So some of that backward planning and calendaring can be useful. And of course, in the interest of time, I'm not going to share my screen. We'll put this in the show notes so you all see it. There are lots of resources. All of the publishers, including OCP, provide hymn and music suggestions. One of the services we offer, there's a free version and paid version, liturgy.com, that can try and navigate some of these things and at least narrow down the repertoire, or suggest some sources that might be useful to you. If you're an NPM member, you have access to liturgyhelp.com. If you're not an NPM member, there's lots of reasons to join, and access to Liturgy Help could certainly be one of them. Check it out, because across publishers, there's lots of musical suggestions and resources. So sometimes knowing these concepts and spending the time developing, I'm going to use your comparison, Adrian, developing our own liturgical knowledge and understanding, familiarity with the rites, etc., and then utilizing a tool like today's liturgy or liturgy.com, whatever, might be the right pair. Instead of just plunking out the parts, focus on the musicality. Instead of having to do all the legwork to find things, focus on the understanding of the broader liturgical picture, and then utilize a resource that might help you in terms of being more efficient at finding some of those choices moving forward. Jeremy, what about you? How do you focus on, or what did you find is useful to you in terms of planning efficiently?
Well, I don't know if this is about efficiency, but I think the biggest thing that I always try to coach people on and try to stick to myself is getting way out in front of these things, not waiting until Friday morning to finalize what music is going to be sung at a liturgy. And I talk with parish musicians like, yeah, I don't really finalize stuff till like Friday morning or sometimes Saturday morning. I'm like, the disservice you're doing yourself and your parish community is so epic, you don't even realize it.
Yeah.
But begin with the end in mind and start to figure out what are the strategies for introducing things. I have a colleague who will, if he wants to introduce a new hymn tune, he will use it as instrumental prelude and improvise on it as a prelude. And then he'll introduce it at the school mass for the parish and use it at school mass so the kids start to know it. And then he'll use it with a text that's familiar to people so they know it. And then he'll use it with a new text. But that all requires being 2, 3, 4 months ahead of where you want to be. And so just like Adrian talked about a summertime, how am I thinking ahead about my anthem choices, my hymn choices? If you know then what are the 8 hymn tunes or the 4 hymn tunes that you want to introduce to your community over the coming year, plan out a strategy. And you don't have to have every little piece of detail figured out, but just know, like, as a marker, I want to try to introduce this at this time and this at this time. And again, if you're evaluating properly at the end of a season, you might come to the end of the Triduum and go, we really didn't have the right music for during the mandatum, the foot washing. Well, great. If you want to introduce a new piece for Holy Thursday, start thinking about it at Pentecost and start rehearsing it and planning for it and introduce it early. You're going to have much better success of it working at Holy Thursday if you get out in front of it. So the thing I stress all the time is just start early. And the blessing we have as Catholics is that we know what the liturgy is going to be. I feel for Protestant brothers and sisters. So it's like the minister tells them on Thursday morning, well, this is what I'm going to preach about. So you're like, okay, good luck. I mean, we know what the prayers and the readings are going to be. We have that gift of the liturgical year and the Ordo. So take advantage of it.
Yeah, no, that's well said. And I that's exactly right. And I think too of, I use the example of the Year of Hope as a theme, but also when you look at liturgical celebrations and you figure out what do I really need for such and such a celebration, for the most part, there's an ability to utilize that piece or that text someplace else. I'm thinking of, take a look at the lectionary. Our responsorial psalms repeat. Maybe not the appointed antiphon for the psalm, but the psalms themselves do. So utilizing a resource where we're going to have a familiar melody that we can call back upon is useful. Whether this would be an appropriate fit for your community or not, this isn't product placement so much as it is a concept flagging. OCP publishes a resource for the entrance and communion antiphons called Let Us All Rejoice. And it's more of a contemporary setting of the entrance and communion antiphon texts. But what I appreciate about the approach to it that the composers took, Steve Angerzano and Sarah Hart and Curtis Stephen, is that for the most part, there's a handful of melodic structures that are reutilized throughout the liturgical year for the entrance and communion antiphon. So if I want to introduce that into our community's Sunday celebrations, we can do so now that we've mastered the musical element. We have those themes in our hearts and in our minds so we can pray them well. So when the text changes, we're not having to introduce a whole new melody or a whole new metered through composed setting. Like we have something to hang our hat on. So sometimes the efficiency is not just in your own executive functioning skills of what resources you're using. It's efficiency in terms of how much work later am I going to have to do to get the congregation comfortable with what I'm asking them to do. Let's choose something that's a pastorally efficient resource, and it's going to be efficient for you too.
I make a technical wonky point about antiphons, and I think this sometimes is a problem for musicians. The antiphons don't always, and in fact, they often don't correspond to the readings from the lectionary. And so people will look at them and say, well, that doesn't match up with anything. I don't know why I would incorporate that. Just a reminder, nowhere in our liturgical documents does it say that the hymns and songs for Mass need to tie only to the readings from the lectionary. So keep all of those contrasting sources in mind and don't be thrown by the fact that the entrance antiphon may have nothing to do with the lectionary. That's fine.
Yeah, yeah. And on that point too, as a under efficiency and participation, etc., like keep in mind, not just in seasons like Advent, Lent, etc., but throughout the year, that it might be perfectly appropriate within your community to plan with a seasonal mindset in mind. In Advent, we are going to use the seasonal psalm option, or we're going to use a seasonal gathering hymn, or we can do something where we aren't utilizing 6 new musical settings of something every single Sunday, but instead we can really enter into something over the course of a season or period of time, which is also a way efficiently. One other thing I want to mention, because I know we're getting short on time here, is keep in mind that one of the other ways to efficiently plan later, I mentioned, have future you be grateful for today you, is how do you keep organized and documented all of the work you've done in your planning this year so you can access it for next year. I know plenty of people who plan, send out their email, and then next year when they're looking at planning something might not necessarily have access to their notes or didn't keep that worship aid or whatever it might be. By documenting and keeping track, archiving the work that you're doing now will be of great assistance to you next year during seasons like Lent or during a week like Triduum, or in 3 years when we come back around to year B and you're looking at what was familiar, what did we do, what worked well, what can I draw upon. So keeping track of that information is also super helpful. Last topic that we didn't get too much directly, although we've talked about it a little bit, is how do we keep people informed and aligned? Adrian, you gave the example of this group that's together and in discussion. And so there's some informing and aligning that helps with your pastor in terms of identifying what he's going to preach. How do you communicate with your musicians or the liturgical ministers that are serving at your various masses to keep them informed and aligned? What tools do you use, Adrian?
Well, I like to gather with everybody in the beginning of the year, staff included, and kind of just explain my vision for what the music ministry is, both long-term and short-term, and really kind of try to solicit that buy-in to get some of my volunteer or paid musicians to really kind of vibe with what I'm trying to do. And a lot of it is just a conversation. And then as far as communication goes, I mean, I am an incessant emailer, so I send emails all the time, and I organize everything on a little section of our sthelen.org website for music, where everything can be accessed.
Yeah, great.
I think that's just such an easy thing to do these days. And the more it's available and it's also archivable, you know, nothing exists just in an email or just in a verbal conversation, and it's accessible for everybody. One of the things that when I was in the last parish I was in before I came here, I always made sure that planning of music was done at least a month before it was going to happen. Hopefully it was done more than that, but a month was like my drop dead date. But one of the things I did was put together a season worth of all the hymns and songs that were going to be used. I gave it to the entire pastoral staff. And I did that for a couple of reasons. I wanted the preachers to know what was going to be sung and they could incorporate it in their homilies. And they did when they knew what it was going to be. I also wanted the catechists to know what music was going to be sung on Sunday. And I would say, if you want a recording of something, I'll happily record it for you to use in a CCD class or a youth ministry gathering so that you can sing with, you know, kids in a way, or you know, just trying to help the entire parish engage in and use the music that is planned. That only works if you do it in advance. And it's easier now to share that with other people via the cloud and things like that than it's ever been before.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead, Adrian.
that symbiosis is really important with the whole staff, that you got the faith formation people, the early childhood people all on board, and they know your music selection, so that, for example, we have a Mommy and Me music class that meets on Saturday morning. The person who runs it, my wife, coincidentally, she incorporates some of the songs from worship on Sunday with the little kids, and like it's a whole never-ending circle of the music from the liturgy living outside of the liturgy too.
Yeah. In my experience, now it doesn't mean that they take them, right? But for the most part, catechists, Catholic school teachers, someone who's going to be presiding, anyone who, or preaching rather, anyone who needs to identify or create content is never going to just get frustrated by some sort of suggestion that might help them out. Doesn't mean they're going to take it. Your deacon and your priest might not preach about the thing that you were really hoping that they will, and that's their prerogative. But it doesn't hurt to suggest. I think the biggest communication alignment recommendation I can make to everyone is, you're thinking about this a lot. Don't expect others to be a mind reader, right? Some of this comes with real practical things, like on the Solemnity of the Immaculate Conception, I think it is, there are multiple options for readings available. Well, whichever option for readings you planned music for, you should, or planning, you know, intercessions around, or whatever it might be, you should let the person who's preaching that day know, because how are they going to know unless you communicate it, right? Don't make assumptions about understanding and knowledge. Same thing for, why are we doing what we're doing during Advent? Share the topic sentence. People will appreciate that type of formation and that type of background catechesis. There are tools like, I know liturgy.com, if you have one of the, in full disclosure, if you have one of the premium or paid subscriptions, you can create your lists in liturgy.com to plan, and it'll automatically email that list out to your musicians. So something like that might be useful, but there are tools like that. We are at time, and I know our panelists are busy and need to go to something else. So I want to say just a couple of words of thanks. Adrian, Jeremy, thank you so much for being with us. Jeremy, welcome back. Adrian, we hope we'll have you back very soon. Participants watching this live or recorded, we will have all of these associated resources and a reference list put together in this episode guide that we'll post to the section of the website once this video is rendered. The Center for Learning has a lot of resources for you individually and your community when it comes to planning, understanding the ritual, getting a liturgy committee together, leading effective rehearsals, community formation for the liturgy or liturgical catechesis for a particular season or in your school. So please check out learnwithocp.org. We're more than happy to help however we can. So thanks again for being here. Thank you for everything you do for your community. And if there's something we can do to help you out, let us know. Thanks, everyone. God bless.